Welcome, fellow armchair generals. This is Gamer 1745, and we're going to be continuing the playthrough that we're looking at how well I've so far made Third Reich Events work with Black Ice 10.51. Yeah, I think it's a minor job to update it to the more recent one once I get there. I'm not sure about the other playthrough, the one that we were losing against the Russians, if I'll go back to there, but not right immediately. I'll see. The biggest thing, of course, the biggest problem with that is the lack of manpower. And I know some people, I think, just want to see a YouTuber go through pain and suffering, but I think a lot of want to see, well, can I overcome the challenge? This is a real challenge. Yeah, I get that it is a challenge, but I just don't see a manpower solution, and I really think to a point the game is broken, because in 1942 Germany should not be running out of manpower. God, no. So that, don't forget to build your heavy tanks earlier. They will help you. Well, we'll see about if we get that far, but with the heavy tanks, but focusing on more of Air Force help, perhaps. Yes, definitely I would say from the last playthrough I did not build enough fighters. One, and two, when I started the campaign in Russia, I left too many fighters in the West. I should have had more. So it was always sort of like, oh shit, all my fighter units are, those knew we were talking about what went wrong with the last playthrough. It was always just feeding in a few more, as opposed to just having enough to defeat their air force and keep them down. It was always just trying to be defensive. To a point, it would have been better to move all of my aircraft in the west to the east and just suffer the IC damage of strategic bombing for a little while and take out their air force in the air, and maybe some bombing raids on some of their air bases too. That would have been a much smarter thing, Toyjet. You're absolutely right. Watching for TRE make another German playthrough. Good luck with this. Yeah, that's what I'm testing right now. I'm seeing how well this version of TRE works with this. Well, what I'm doing is, another thing is with that last playthrough, if you notice, I'm not doing any upgrades or any reinforcements right now. I'm making supplies, and we don't need any consumer goods. So I am now starting to make, like you can see, air units. So we're still building a lot of industry. This is May 37, lots of industry. We're getting some of the Navy built here, getting some of that. Most of these are, only 2, almost 3 ICs. Force these destroyers. They'll take a while, though, not terribly long, but they'll take a while. That's a bit longer for the Admiral Hipper, but get us another bigger ship out here. Oh, we need to get these to the top. Good, get them to the top, and we're getting more. We'll get some submarines in, and we're keeping these guys down here for the moment. But yeah, so I'm trying to learn the lessons. And yeah, I want the DDs to help with all those submarines that we found, because what they've moved, Black Ice team over the years has switched between the thoughts, is that a destroyer, or is that a destroyer group? Is that a submarine, or is that a submarine group? And right now they've sort of gone to, it's a submarine, I think. And destroyers and all that. We're going to rebase over here with these guys. So it really gave the Soviets a lot of submarines building. I think too much. but I don't know Soviet production. Used more or less the entire Luftwaffe during the first month or so, Barbarossa, in an effort to decimate the Red Air Force, then move the air wings back to the west. Well, yeah, move it back to a more balanced east-west thing. That way, whatever they come back up with, air units, whether it's bombers coming out or fighters, you're just there with your fighters and zap them. Absolutely, that's what I'm thinking. Doing. Hey, Beam Slam. It wasn't the Genius AI. I'm going to say that. It partially, I would just say, learning experience with how the game changed. The mod changed. Some of it might be, player, me, not making some of the best choices when it comes to some of the laws that set up, particularly in regarding to conscription and manpower, to make sure I have enough manpower. Some of that, I do think the way it was going, too many divisions were shattering. Shattering. I know I lost. I put up a poll and I know I lost it, or it was sort of even, but got to figure because people were voting on the poll after hearing my comments. So yeah, they're influenced by what I have to say. I really don't think any divisions from any nation. We could argue about somewhere in Japan, or you want to try to argue some super elite SS unit. No division should continue attacks and lose more than 50% of the strength in one event. So there were way too many battles in which I found way too many divisions just going down to, keeping enough organization, just going down to zero manpower. That ate up a lot of manpower instead of just ending the action when organization should have, which organization / morale, however you want to characterize that. Okay, well, I think we're going to, let's do steel production. Make sure we have enough. Hello, the Bear Jew. I'm doing well. Yeah, once it comes out in a week or so, I'm going to be playing some unmodded Hoi 4 with the new DLC. I want to check out the railroads and see how that's all going. So I am looking forward to that for sure. Okay, naval airstrike tactics. So right now I'm looking, yes, we're going to keep that going, looking for either ones that will be useful now. Ones, what I should be saying is not ones, but technologies or tactics or such that are useful now, or ones that are easy to research now. Oh, there's the other Panzer Division. I knew there should be 3. Well, Third Reich Events will have the I just had to say, we'll have it back to the 8 brigades. We can it goes back to 8 brigades now with Third Reich Events, and it will be something that players will be able to get 8 brigades, or the AI for a few nations, mainly Britain and America and Germany, will build 8 brigade divisions. The few of us that talked about it and working on it figured that the only other nation that maybe would have an 8th brigade would be Japan. But the Soviet brigades, the French, divisions, Soviet divisions were often just more brigades. But the Soviets, the French, the Italians, AIs should not be making, the AIs, specifically the AI, should not be making 8 brigade divisions, but the player will have the choice. So that is, and that's very historical too. If you look at, the Americans, for a while they had a square division, which means 4 regiments in it. They very quickly go down, and before they enter the war, go back down to triangle divisions, which have 3 brigades. But they had a lot of support elements in their divisions. So their divisions were fairly big when you look at the support element areas, all of these, anti-aircraft and engineers and all of that stuff. They have that really big. The British do also tend to do that too. The French, I don't know a whole lot, but the problem with giving them 8 brigade divisions for the AI is they may not have enough divisions to properly hold everything. The Soviets should not have it. Japan, the division sizes were that big, but they did not have a lot of support elements. They did not have anti-tank guns in their divisions, at least not as standard practice. So the way they should be larger, if you wanted to do it, and as Third Reich Events, I have not gone in and touched any of this, but would simply to have the strength of, say, infantry brigades, of the actual infantry brigades, would be larger. Things like that would sort of how you would better to do Japan, as opposed to just having huge numbers of brigades, or support units with it. So yeah, it is matching ours. Been working with Exergen a bit on this and talking to a few other people. Our views of history. Of historical stuff. So we're going with that. Had later in the war, like the 1st Infantry Division had conf groups, though. Yeah, this sounds like a good idea. Fits better to the organization. Well, and see, they're going back down. And I would actually, right now, I think it would be best, though I'm not going to go in and code it. I think this is a mistake, having these horse transport, various, because they have German, but there's other ones, civilian vehicles. I think this is a mistake because these are mostly rear area elements within the division, and they take a lot of casualties because the way it is, they're either going to take a lot of casualties or they become some sort of super unit. I think it would be better to get rid of those and really make it more motorized, semi-motorized infantry, and then for supporting elements go back to motorized artillery, and you can have motorized heavy, or maybe heavy only is motorized. Really, there are some heavy horse-drawn, so that's iffy. But definitely, regular artillery can be horse-drawn or motorized. Anti-tank can be, towed, as opposed to a tank destroyer. It would be towed anti-tank that's motorized, or towed anti-tank that is horse-drawn. I would think that would be a better, which would just give you a lot more units or types to choose from. That would be better. And if it was doing it that way, 7 would be just fine if you got rid of the need for all these yellow ones here. But with those, it's easier and I think more correct to go to, we would give them money for oil, yes. Latvia, we would give no, and no, we'll steal Belgium's particularly. So it just, playing within the realm that we already have here. No, I don't want fuel. I might buy oil, but I buy fuel from you. Thank you. Okay, artillery, barrel, and ammunition. Thanks. At least that's how I'm interpreting everything that's going on, or how I would do it. But it would take more modding to do that than doing what we're doing by going back to 8 brigades. But we're not trying to make trying to give just the player or Germany super advantages. Yeah, let's yeah, we'll do this. You know, and should the Soviets have an 8 brigade division? Not really. You know, and the AI, we're talking humans can make the human choices, because the Soviet human player could choose to go with 8 brigades. But it would, because of the size of the front, it's probably better for the Soviets to have more, a little bit weaker divisions than few stronger divisions, because they probably won't use them well. So that's you know, part of our thought process as well as historical. I mean, it's both a historical situation as well as a thought process on that. Could they integrate transports into the HQ brigade and make a few up? Yeah, they could. They absolutely could. Hello, Ari. Haven't seen you in a while. Hope you're doing well. They absolutely could do that, but I'm not going to do it because because of time. Would just be time to do it, and then you got constantly, if you're going with all the rest of Black Ice's updates, meaning as opposed to doing a fork in the road and going down a different path. That's what some people are pushing me to do, and I don't have the interest to do all the structural changes to the game. I want to stick to mostly being a events-oriented type mod, not making my own game or my own big mod. So yeah, they can do all this. But I'm not going to chase all of that down. I'm just having fun. Many ones and P's. Okay, let's see. Currently we have pre-war airports, pre-war rail, pre-war extensive. Looking okay. Yeah, I guess we'll add. I'm trying not to do all of these starting all at the same time. I do want them. We will take the hit here for building this for a little while. Yeah, days and nights are mixed lately. Sundays are a lot harder to show up. No problem, Mary, but just haven't seen you any other times. Would make USA flavor mod, but yeah, I don't have the time to, unfortunately. Yeah, well, I'm collecting. I don't know if I'm ever going to make it, but I'm collecting event ideas and photos and whatnot for flavor mods, event mods for everywhere, not just Germany. So someday maybe, but I don't know when. If ever. And if for somebody got our blueprints. If for Hearts of Iron 3 or if Hearts of Iron 4 it gets to where I'm wanting to mod it more than 3, this railway mod intrigues me. Well, a couple of things really intrigue me, guys. In Hearts of Iron 4, they have a new lead program developer, which I don't know that if I've ever interacted with him. I'm not like friends or anything, but I interacted with the previous one quite a bit. Over time, not quite a bit at any one time, but supply has gone from the state level to the provincial level. Who was asking for that from before release? Oh, I was. And who was asking for railroads since before release? Oh, I was. And now railroads are also at the provincial level and not at the state level. So yay, hooray. They're doing some things that I want, and even looking at the video evidence that I have now they've gone through and reduced the number of provinces in Europe from with the level that it was in Hearts of Iron 3 to 4 is about half. At least I counted half less. I did a look between the two maps for the Netherlands, half the number of provinces. But even with that, they look like they don't have enough railroads going around for most of Europe. But where it really gets critical, so going around railroads and supplies around this part of the world, yeah, sure, there's probably, historically, well, there's stuff going through Luxembourg. But some of this area might not have any railroads, sure, but there's definitely railroads coming through, from Belgium into Liège and from Germany. So there's definitely railroads coming through here. Not exactly sure if there would be railroads in this province, just don't know. I'm guessing there would. I'm sure up in here there's railroads. So most of this area is plenty of railroads. Now, yeah, coming through this, the Alps, and there's some places like that, and you get into out of the way, some coastal provinces or whatever might not have railroads, sure. But where it becomes really critical for the historical reasons of doing things are places like the Soviet Union, places like, very much so, Africa. And it really matters there. Yeah, well, I have been working with Exergen. No, I haven't been working recently because I've been going through dealing with things for a few months. It's over with, but I'm just sort of recovering mentally from dealing with it all. It's difficult enough with him trying to explain what needs to be done and then having it done right. Not that he's very good at doing it, but just sometimes doesn't understand what I think are simple instructions. I'm just not explaining some stuff well enough. So it's really hard to get people to help. Not to get people who want to help, but get people and have it helpful, and not me end up doing almost as much work in the long run. Heavy tank units hit. I don't know. We have not yet got to being able to even design heavy tank units. So we don't have any in production, and I'm not ready to produce tank units, any tank units yet. Think more 38 tank units or something more like that, and maybe some heavies. Okay, no longer receive a teeny bit of money for some energy from Lithuania. Fine. Okay, we sent over this corps with 2 divisions. This corps, cavalry brigade there, which is a bit over strength because it's sort of a full brigade, but that makes it almost effective as a cavalry division. Maybe not quite, because I don't know that it has. Well, it does have artillery, medium artillery reconnaissance HQ. Yeah, but this HQ doesn't give combined arms bonuses. But still, putting them on the front line makes it useful. So with TRE, I try to make things historical and not harder or easier for the player. Now, it may end up being harder or easier, but we're only doing it because I think it's historical. I think early lights would be better than early heavies, right? Barring speaking not in game. Well, the Panzer. Oh, I didn't know we were paused. Well, you've played War Thunder, I know, Ari. I think the Panzer II in War Thunder, with its heavy penetration, is way overpowered. I think the 20mm gun on the Panzer II would have, don't know, but I think it would have trouble, at least, especially the ammunition that was being used at the time of the Battle of France, I think would have trouble penetrating the standard French tanks, the R-35, the H-35, the Salma. But the high explosive rounds from those 20mm will mess up infantry really well. Germany, before the invasion of Poland, has something like 6 or 8 half tracks, big heavy half tracks with an 88 millimeter gun on back of it, designed as a bunker buster but used as an anti-tank gun, and they used them in France as well. And they realized that there was going to be a problem with the French tanks, so they were starting to make, the Jagdpanzer ones for the Battle of France. So if you're counting like the R35, oh no, not the R30, the 35T or the 38T, the Czech tanks, as light tanks, then yes, they are particularly useful for going into France in real life. Where it really is, it should have been a lot more, is medium tanks. Medium. Now, what's a heavy tank? I don't know if anybody there wants to type a whole lot, but what is a heavy tank? Is a heavy tank a big tank with lots of guns, but guns no more powerful than the standard tank, and armor no thicker than a standard tank? Basically the Neubautfahrzeug. I think more medium tanks are better. Is a heavy tank something just with heavy armor on it? A more flexible vehicle is probably more useful. If you're talking about, is a heavy tank something that has a big gun on it that can destroy all the enemy vehicles, yeah, that's a really good idea. But do note, Arno, no one makes heavy tanks anymore. Yeah, air launch torpedoes. So that would be under bomb load air launch torpedoes. Okay, Arno forward for the moment with that. Is there some other? Okay, let's continue. I want to do these now if we're doing anything early. And what is, okay, unpronounceable German word. Oh, here it is. Okay. Okay, we can do brigade command structures now, usefully. Light and medium tanks are more suitable for blitzkrieg type of warfare, maybe support with infantry tanks, but France had some nasty heavies tanks to encounter. Yes, exactly. Yeah, and so if we sort of take this for our types of vehicles used in World War II, and this is actually pretty good here. We've got light, medium, heavy, super heavy. Are these supposed to be King Tigers? Or are these supposed to be the Mouse? I don't know. Or the IS-3s or something. I'm not quite sure what are these super ridiculous things of a Mouse, or are these just King Tigers and IS-3s or Joseph Stalin 3s or JS-3s, however. Okay, so infantry tanks. Those are, I'm gonna say for the moment, because not all infantry, because the Matilda 1s are heavily, for its time, a heavily armored tank, slow, with just a machine gun. Okay, but most of the infantry tanks are by the British, and this is sort of the British who make these, are heavily armored vehicles. Because of that, they're slow, but they don't think they need to be fast. That isn't a requirement. And they're designed to have armor somewhat equally all the way around them. is conceptually, instead of trying to just go for good armor in the front, they're still thinking more on World War I terms, and they continue through to the end of the war with an infantry support tank, and generally speaking, with a gun no stronger than what we would normally consider medium tanks. So this is just a tank basically with heavy armor, a sort of a medium design, medium tank with heavy armor. Okay, then we have the Germans, and they got the assault guns, the Stugs. Now they start out with low armor destructive power because they weren't meant to do that. They were meant to blow up bunkers and support the infantry. They eventually become something of a tank destroyer. You also have medium tank destroyers here, which are the Jagdpanzer type vehicles, and then these heavy ones, they're definitely supposed to be things like the Elephant, the Jagdtiger, the heavy ones. And then the standard sort of tank destroyers, these are meant to be the Martyrs, going through the whole process. So, and you can go heavy assault guns, those are like the Brumbar and whatnot, and special purpose are just amphibious and other wacky stuff. So, I'm not building any infantry support tanks. I'm going to follow the German pattern and go with assault guns. So we don't need those. This heavy armor really is meant to be something that has both heavy armor and a powerful gun in a tank form. So, just where on these matrices, the heavy armor designs, yeah, they can be useful, definitely. I see more of as a weight class than a typical armament. If it wasn't so tired, I probably would give a number. But yeah, you don't need to do that. By medium to late, or heavy tanks are far outclass the light tanks in power and armor. Yeah, and so, it depends on how you're doing stuff and how you're categorizing it all. And a lot of it comes down to your tactics. And in a way, I would say it would be better to come across open terrain like this with 12 medium tanks instead of 4 heavy tanks, if you will. So if you're coming across here, now if the enemy has tanks that your main guns can't penetrate, well, you're screwed. So yeah, if you're looking at, it needs to be a heavy tank, well, a Panther's gun can do just about as good as a Tiger I's gun. So there is a certain element to numbers. One could argue that the Stug was an infantry tanking concept. Yes, but tactically used different. They're both an infantry support weapon, absolutely, beam slam. The difference is the Stug belongs to the artillery, and the infantry tank belongs to the tanks, but it's assigned to the infantry. So, and tactically it's used different. The idea for the infantry tanks is that they move forward towards the enemy, move conceptually, obviously they keep using it after there's no longer a World War I style front line, but move into the enemy, and that the enemy is going to be able to shoot at its sides as much as at its front. And the infantry are going to come in its wake, but in its immediate wake. So it doesn't need to move much faster than the infantry can keep up with it as it's advancing. So but armor is sort of in the lead, but it's not a concentrated amount of armor as in a panzer or armored division. It's sort of there may be like 4 infantry tanks or something well, the British platoons were 3, at least at the start of the war. Towards the end, they were mostly at 4. But so you maybe have like a platoon of infantry tanks. Now, maybe over 1,000 yards or meters, there may be another group of 3. But there's a group of 3, say, infantry tanks moving forward. And in that wake, there's a company or a battalion or whatever of infantry moving. You don't see my fingers and hands moving, I know, but I hope it's coming through. Moving right in their wake, right up with them. Okay? And whatnot. The reverse is the situation with a Stug. The idea is that the infantry are advancing behind the infantry, not leading the infantry. Behind the infantry are the Stugs, and when it's identified an enemy concentration, and particularly can be like just, sandbags and a few cut down logs and earth kind of entrenchment, an enemy position that has, like, say, a Vickers machine gun in it, or it could be, a fortified pillbox like here. Then the Stug shoots and destroys that position, allowing the infantry to keep moving. So the infantry is in the front, screening the tanks from anti-tank guns or anti-tank rifles, if we're talking about early in the war. Because, see, early in the war, the concept, the British had the Boys anti-tank rifle. They knew the Germans had an anti-tank rifle. They figured that their Matildas were going to be big enough to, you could shoot at that Matilda with the anti-tank rifle. Not that you can't eventually, you might find a weak spot, but probably not. But you might be able to disable it by hurting the tracks, or, that's why they put that sort of armor around the sides of it to try to protect the road wheels. You might be able to disable it, but the idea is once you're firing at it, the position is going to be noted, and either the infantry tank or some of the other soldiers that are with it are going to shoot at the infantry anti-tank gun rifles, or if there's a few anti-tank guns out there, especially like a 37 millimeter, and they're going to expose their position, hopefully not disable or knock out any of the infantry tanks. Are going to swerve their turret over onto the target and start engaging it, and so they're going to be out there leading it, but know that they're going to be taking damage, and likely damage, on the side. Where the Stug has fairly weak sides, that's all. That stuff is supposed to be cleared or identified, a position of an anti-tank gun, well before it can get to the sides, and then you're shooting your 75 millimeter high explosive rounds on those targets, and often, because of the short barrel, lobbing them up and over, even sort of close support though, but up and over infantry that isn't necessarily standing up and moving around, but laying down under cover because of the enemy fire. So you're not terribly likely to hit your own troops as you're shooting over them. That'd be very unlucky to have that happen. And even a close miss would kill. The shockwave could kill or severely injure a human being. So you're not that worried about. And the early Stugs have no machine guns even. So you're not that worried about your own friendly troops as you're engaging in an enemy position. So partially, yeah, in concept that they're infantry support, they're basically the same. Now the French infantry support is the little two-man tank, and wanting to spread out a lot of little two-man tanks everywhere instead of a Matilda or a Stug. So their infantry tanks are what we would normally consider a light tank. But so they're tactically and conceptually between the Stug and the British infantry tank are very different in how they're employed, but in that they're supporting infantry assaults. They're very similar in that kind of role. So shifting vehicles. Shifting vehicles. Would you say to the Eastern Front, would it have been better for the Germans to focus on more air production over tank production? No. And I don't think it's a either or. Okay. So this is one thing you have to understand. And one of the things that I've puzzled out if I was making a game, and I don't know, there's almost nothing, and as an overall production time, there is almost nothing that's competing between an aircraft and a tank in production, except its engine. Now, aircraft engines, yeah, they're coming out of a different factory, but you can convert a tank engine factory to an aircraft engine factory. So all the rest of that aluminum or light steel construction on that fighter aircraft or the bomber aircraft is almost, you know, yeah, if you're starting way back at the early foundations, but rolled steel for the armor plates, the wheels, it's not the track links. Yeah, the machine guns out of both things or whatever would be the same, but tank barrel production. So I don't see them as so directly as a competing thing. And Germany more or less has enough steel that it isn't really a question of steel between the two of them. So I don't see that as being really the big limitation. And I really don't see manpower, you know, the guys assembling the vehicles, as being the big limitation. So you just can't, it's not necessarily this or that. You know, just, you know, as in Hearts of Iron, here is just going, oh, well, produce more aircraft. No, it's an aircraft factory. It should be an engine factory, and then a tank factory and an aircraft factory, and you're just delivering engines to one factory or the other factory. That's more how it should be. Had weak sight armor, perhaps similar to that of the early Stugs, but the gun was the same. Was more useful with the Panzer units because of the turret. Well, no, I wouldn't entirely say. Well, yes, and we're talking early days. For the Battle of France, there's almost no Stugs, and there's very few Panzer IVs. The big difference between the two is tactical employment, you know, how it's being employed, and two, who they belong to. The Panzer IVs belong to the Panzers. The Stugs belong to the artillery. The guys who drove the Panzers, you know, wore black uniforms with pink piping on their edges of their, you know, collar tabs and shoulder boards. And the guys who drove the Stugs wore field gray uniforms until late in the war. That starts to change a little bit. But field gray uniforms, sometimes cut in the same style as the Panzer uniforms, but wore field gray uniforms with red piping for artillery. And the Panzer IVs are meant to operate the same as the Stugs in the way that they're supposed to be there along, coming just sort of behind the main Panzer IIIs. This is in theory more than in practice, maybe, but coming along just behind the Panzer IIIs. And when you you encounter a fortification, it could just be a hasty fortification again. Oh, they've set up in that building and they've reinforced it with sandbags and timbers, and they've, you know, made a, you know, strong position, and our little 37 millimeter guns aren't really doing too much damage to it. Bring up to 75 and go boom. And so it's sort of the same role. And when it's used as a support vehicle, I think maybe even the Stug is better, because the Stug has better front armor than the Panzer IV does, because of the weakness of the turret, and some of the upper hull elements are either gone or angled or just thicker. And since it's supposed to be, because you're being told where it is and communicating over the radios, you're not going to likely be shot in the sides, because you know how you're approaching the danger of the enemy position to come and blow it up. Now, once the Panzer IV becomes the main tank, well, then that's, yeah, it's better, so that's different. But when it's being used as a support tank, you know, in 1940, early 41, in some ways the Stug may be better, but the Panzers can't get any Stugs because they all go to the artillery. So, you know, it's partially that. Okay, CAG pilot training. Hope this is all fun to listen to me talk about. Okay, let's go over to CAG crew training. Talk about history. Yes, armor matters. Yes, turrets matter, and the ability to swing on the target and whatnot matters. But what really matters more than either of that is identifying your enemy. You know, his where he is, what he is, and especially where he is, and communicating that amongst yourself. You know, amongst your units is like identifying where the enemy is and using your radios and rapidly communicating what's going on. That is the German superiority in 1940 in France, against France. All those French tanks running around without any radios in them. So the major upgrade that Germany does to most, I don't know quite the percentage, but I would say most of the captured French tanks, they stick radios in them. So the Germans know that even if you're doing anti-partisan activities, having, you know, you're shooting at the local, you know, guys that just have some rifles and pistols with the tank, you still have a radio inside of it. So that is the German superpower, is its flexibility of tactical engagement. The movies, and I've watched just about every one that I can, made during World War II, you know, and they're in English, I'm talking about, you know, some are made in Britain, some are made in the US, always portray the German soldier as some sort of robotic person who will do exactly what he's told. And sometimes it's and it is done as a comedic level, that, you know, they'll follow if they're told to walk off the cliff, they'll just all go. That's the American way of fighting World War II. The American, at least tactical way, is to follow your goddamn orders and you do what you're told. The German way is the opposite. It is for the free-thinking NCO or, you know, junior officer, your lieutenant, your guy in charge of a platoon. And often, I don't think people realize this, how often during the war, there was just a sergeant in charge of a platoon. There was no lieutenant. Not that they wouldn't, maybe theoretically should have one, it just weren't available. Let's just keep going with sergeants in charge. The Germans are the ones that are supposed to point out your objective and then allow the unit, whether it's a company, a platoon, a battalion, do its own thing to figure out to take its objective, where the Americans, their way of fighting is to, you know, give instructions on how to take that hill. You know, we want you to go up this side of the hill and do this thing, and then they got to follow orders. So even with the Americans' ability to eventually, with their, you know, their walkie-talkie type radios, more flexible radios, are more, you know, under higher command orders and less able to, you know, think for themselves. Now, they're not supposed to, you know, walk off a cliff or anything, but they're supposed to follow orders much more so than the German army concept. And this goes back before World War I. The Germans, especially after the Franco-Prussian War, really, and this is where Kriegsspiel comes in, is, you know, like, what is it, war talk or war speak is how it would be translated into English, in which they have a war game. This is the war game that is set up in the 19th century, and I'll describe it for you. Let me just save this here because I'm talking a long time. Let me describe this war game. And this was actually how, and other nations adopted this to some degree. I don't know when it comes into the US, is what they do. Okay, true. That's why I was wondering why the initiative doctrine concept was removed from the latest BICE. Can't remember the exact wording. Yeah, I don't know on some of that stuff. The way the war game was supposed to happen was that there was supposed to be a room and with a map, and they would put the units onto the map where everybody was, and then you would have two rooms, one to either side or some sort of thing. They can't see into the first room, but you have two rooms, and that would be the two sides, the two commanders in essence. And he'd have a map. And he'd have like a box or something with maybe two of them. I'm not some of these details I'm making up, but he'd have like a box full of all of his units, figures or counters, or because it could be wood blocks, or maybe they were just, I don't think they were just marking on the map. I think they were using some sort of counters or whatever, so for his units. And then he'd have like a box that he could supply of things that could represent enemy units, and he would be sitting in the room, and someone would either come in and do one of two things to him. They would either give him a verbal description, say something to him. And so it started. He would then place, he would then give orders to where to put his units. So he'd put them on the map, and then he'd have to write the orders out. Let's say it's a battalion-sized game. First company, go to position 1. Whatever that is, grid map or whatever, position 1. Second company, position 2. Third company, position 3. And he'd tell them, where to go. So he puts them on the map. Now, the referees would judge whether they think they made it to the right position or not. Because maybe they get to the wrong, because of map reading skills. I don't know if any of you have gone through map reading skills, or you all just of the age of iPhones that show you right where you are on the map, but actually map reading skills and figure out not just city maps, but where you have street signs, but actually field that. So they'd figure out how well his orders were followed. So maybe some units on the real map in the central room were different than his map. And so that would, but he had put his where he thinks all of his units are. And so then he would get a report, and then at certain times, let's say he's going on the offensive, and his objective is to go take a town or a hill, it doesn't matter. And then he would say, maybe write out at 6 a.m., artillery is to fire a barrage of 5 rounds each gun on hill Y. Okay, and he'd hand that off. That would be equivalent of a runner getting the message. This is in the 19th century, and the guy would go take to the theoretical artillery commander, and then they would, whether they rolled dice or they just figured the odds of maybe even firing at the right hill or how accurate it was going to be. But and then at 6:30 a.m., because that would be after the artillery barrage is over, Company A was to march up along the road to the hill and write out the orders, or at some point may verbally give out orders. And then so the war game would progress in the center of the room, and then somebody would come in and say, I'm reporting from Company A. We've spotted a battalion of infantry in front of us. And so the commander may have moved the Company A's figure on the map a bit, where he thinks it is. Oh, it's in front of us. Okay, a battalion of of infantry or whatever in front of him. What do we do now? And so the whole thing, and then he would either write out orders or give out verbal orders, because verbal orders may be mistaken. They judge how accurate they'd be given out. But they may have only seen a platoon. they got reported that there's a battalion, but there may have only actually been a platoon. But it's in front of us. But maybe Company A went on the wrong road. So when he thinks that it's in Y location, it's really an X location. So it's all, and so he's playing this, and the commander places stuff on the map, and it's all by his thinking of where it is that he's keeping track, and all he's doing is either giving verbal or written instructions and getting only verbal or written instructions. And when we're under heavy fire, well, what does that mean? Does that mean there's 5 artillery shots at you, or is there 50 artillery shots at you? What is the whole thing communicating like? And this is how the German officer corps was trained starting in the late 19th century, this Kriegsspiel. And so you did this whole thing that is just on the idea that you can't see anything. You're just getting reports and giving orders. And this taught the German army. The guy back at the headquarters doesn't know what the fuck's going on. The guy at the front knows what's going on. So you have to, set goals and objectives like defend the river. And this is your section, and this is your section, and this is your section, and this is your section. And, and do that. And then let us know what's going on. And because you may have a reserve back here. And this section guy is reporting, hey, heavy enemy fire. This middle section, no enemy activity. This section, enemy crossing the river. Well, let's send the reinforcements to the river crossing and ignore everything, give no extra support to the other parts, because so the commander back here doesn't know what's going on. Now, I've read a lot of book biographies, autobiographies, whatever, on German officers during World War II. That's why they're constantly going to the different division headquarters, and sometimes actually going up to the front so they can get a look themselves. But they're just looking at here where they think there's a river crossing, and there may have been a river crossing, but it ends up the main crossing is coming here. It's just this was the first probing attack. So that is why Germany does so well early on, and even once it is over fucking whelmed, it really is in the East, but particularly in the West by the Americans coming everywhere with the British sort of following along, that they still do as good as they do. I mean, they're losing everything. They're losing all the battles. It's just how badly are they losing them? But even with all of that, they're still doing damned well. At least that's my assessment of things. And any other army would have collapsed long before. They would have collapsed by the time Paris was taken or something, after D-Day. And considering, the day, or was it 1 day or 2 days before D-Day, the Americans enter Rome. So, pushing up into here, the Soviets are wherever they were. At the time that by taking Paris, most other armies would have been collapsing because there was no ability to deal with this overwhelming pressure on them. But the Germans were able to be flexible enough. Yeah, you can read. Hello, Aurora. Yes. Oh, and I've had some orienteering lessons too. I hope I would be good at it. I've done it a teeny bit many years ago. But yeah, people get lost. You remember sort of the David Schwimmer character from Band of Brothers in training getting lost in the map reading map exercises out there. And so, yeah, it's a skill, and even the best of them can get lost, especially in unfamiliar terrain and country. And this is one thing that the Germans particularly sort of noticed with themselves. The they had hard time navigating out here because a lot of the Germans lived in terrain or areas in which they could always see landmarks. There was enough, a hill, a tall building, a river, a mountain, a forest, and so they were, landmarks as they lived. The country folk, or particularly the city folk, but the country folk were used to having landmarks that were identifiable. But just out in these trackless, parts of Russia, there wasn't it. And yeah, they have a compass and they know whether they're going east or west or north or south. But more than that, trying to figure out, they had a lot of trouble with that on it, or some trouble with it that the Russian who grew up in the terrain didn't have. Okay, heavy armor forging advance. So that is under here. And we're going to stop that, which allows us to super heavy battleship armor thickness. Okay, so I don't know how much this is, but it also gives us mechanical engineering +1. So it's a worthy thing to do. We have a lot of leadership. We're still growing our officer base, but we don't need an officer base in this. The skill was lightly trained and used via school early, but saw enough use in practice myself as well. Very interesting, Aurora. And yes, of course, everyone's, people have those life skills, but I think a lot of modern day people don't have those. I've known a lot of people that can't even read a basic city map. Let's start with a railroad. Okay, I'm going to save this here. And we're going to end this episode, not the live stream, so all of you guys that are here can hang out. But those watching later on YouTube, I hope that was all interesting. I know it delayed us getting through the game, but I got sidetracked as I normally do. So thanks, everyone. I want to thank Timothy, Nils, and Jet for support over on Patreon. But everyone else, if you can just hit that like button, and of course, if you're new here, please subscribe. Really do appreciate it, and I love hearing your comments. It also helps the algorithm. I know we all say this, but it does help. Thanks, everyone.